You're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion. There's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Frederick Hess is a great scholar when it comes to K through 12 education. He's at the American Enterprise Institute, writing about the quote-unquote anti-racism orthodoxy that is attendant to K through 12 education, becoming more and more prevalent. Between ethnic studies as part of the curriculum in California schools and anti-racism as the culture in government schools, I don't know if I'd be in such a rush to see K through 12 schools reopen. Not if I was sending my children there and had no other option. Frederick Hess writing about it, writing about the flim-flam that it is, and we've talked about this extensively, and some of the theoreticians who are behind it, like Ibram Kendi. But it's tragic when it pollutes otherwise good schools and school systems. Recall the KIPP charter schools, a celebrated charter school system in New York, changed their slogan, work hard, be nice. That's controversial. Work hard and be nice, controversial. They changed it in order to dismantle systemic racism. Working hard and being nice apparently have some sort of racial overtone, do they? The superintendent of New York's East Harlem Scholars Academies, in an essay in Education Week, instructed white teachers to steer away from talking about the individual accomplishments of black Americans because doing so would, quote, unintentionally teach students that really good, really successful black folks are exempt from racist structures. We don't want to point out success stories. I thought the mantra was, if you can see it, you can be it. But now if you see it, you don't want to be it?
It's come to this, really?
Understand, and Frederick Hess gives a nice summary of the inanity of it all. How to be an anti-racist in Ibram Kendi's book. There's one correct stance on everything. Everything is a binary. It's either racist or not racist. And so standardized testing, racist. Pot legalization, anti-racist. Medicare for all, anti-racist. Capital gains tax rate, if you want to cut it, racist. Everything is forced through a prism of race with a binary choice, racist or anti-racist. And for, of course, white people, or those who apparently associate with us, I think, you have to spend your life in counseling sessions at a particularly hefty price point, by the way, which corporate America is happy to pay as extortion money, or apologizing, or some combination of the two. Well, in contrast to what's being offered by the Ibram Kendis and so many government school systems, our friend Ian Rowe joins us now to talk about this other report from the American Enterprise Institute, which, if the goal is to achieve upward mobility, which I thought was the goal, to put kids on a path to independence in their lives so they can choose their own course and be successful on their own terms. I thought that was the idea. The new American Enterprise Institute report, incentivize individual agency to achieve upward mobility. That's the way to do it. What a novelty. Ian Rowe, resident fellow at AEI, CEO of Public Prep, also in New York City. Ian, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you for having me on.
I know you're a sunshine and happiness kind of guy. You like to walk on the sunny side of the street and be optimistic and positive, and that's great, and that's good. But I did want to get your comment, though, on what your colleague Rick Hess penned, as well as just what's happening in K through 12 education, even in innovative K through 12 education systems like some of the charter school systems I mentioned.
No, Dan, you're raising a very, very good point. I mean, the charter schools, to some degree, the reason they were created in the first place was to be a bulwark against this idea of fatalism, particularly for low-income kids of color, that there was nothing that you could do to improve your own station in life. And for decades, that's what charter schools, many of them, not all charter schools are great, but many of them are great and have actually proven the premise that with incredibly focused, high expectations, strong academic programs, strong school leadership, kids of any color, kids of any background, regardless of economics, could succeed at the highest levels. So it is very distressing to see kind of a reversal of those. And I think this sort of pressure to virtue signal in some way that somehow the legacies have been racist. And in my view, it's been exactly the opposite. So I'm trying to work with many of our colleagues to use this time to actually stand up for the principles that charter schools were created in the first place.
This report that I referenced from the American Enterprise Institute about individual agency, I love the comparison because it speaks right to the heart of the Marxists that are pushing a very different agenda, a very race-conscious agenda. The look at median net worth of two-parent black households versus single-parent white households. And what does that tell us about the importance of family structure?
Yeah, so the fundamental premise of the American dream is that regardless of the economic situation in which you're born, that doesn't have to define what you ultimately turn out to be. And there is a real issue. I mean, people have talked about the gap between black and white Americans in terms of the racial wealth gap, and there is a gap. If you look solely based on race, the average African-American family has 1/10 the worth of the average white family. But what's interesting is when you put into factors specifically family structure, that relationship is reversed. The average black American family that's married, two-parent household, has almost twice the wealth of the average white American single-parent household. And so what that suggests is maybe there are factors outside of race that are within the control of young people to determine what their economic position is. And it's very important to relate this message because the dominant narrative right now is that if we are to close the racial wealth gap, a number of leading scholars are saying essentially that there's nothing that an individual black American can do to close the racial wealth gap. So, for example, Nicole Hannah-Jones, a writer at the New York Times, wrote a long piece justifying trillions of dollars in reparations to black descendants of slaves by saying, quote, none of the actions we are told black people must take if they want to lift themselves out of poverty and gain financial stability, not marrying, not getting educated, not saving more, not owning a home, can mitigate 400 years of racialized plundering, end quote. I mean, just think about that for a second. So you're saying, even if I got married, even if I got my education, even if I saved, even if I bought a home, none of that will improve my position, or if many of us did it, collectively improve the economic position of black people. It's an inherently defeatist message. And as someone who has run schools for the past decade, I know how debilitating these narratives can be if you feel that your effort is useless towards improving your own economic situation.
Well, you even wrote about Oprah Winfrey, who's, she has her own story of escaping poverty and abuse and really has been an inspiration to millions of people. But she describes in America as a caste system. Can you explain?
Yeah, it's surprising. I mean, Oprah Winfrey, as you say, I mean, she has an incredible story, certainly one of the shining examples of someone of any race who overcame incredible adversity to be not only an incredible business person, but philanthropist, someone who cares about issues. Yeah, she came out and said, in a way almost to permanently establish the superiority of white people over everyone else, in which, quote, white people, no matter where they are on the rung or the ladder of success, they still have their whiteness, which creates an advantage no matter what, end quote. And so the implication is, again, if you're reading that and you're black, I mean, gosh, I guess I'm permanently inferior to this white race. And again, all of these messages we think are just inherently debilitating because it removes the idea of agency. It paints, white people as these permanent villains and black people as these permanent victims who have no ability to control their own destiny. And that's what some psychologists term learned helplessness. And not only, this notion that your individual effort is worthless, I mean, first of all, that depresses human motivation. But based on the data I just shared, it's wrong. I mean, there are decisions that black kids, all kids, have within their control that increase their likelihood to improve their economic outcomes within a single generation. And thus, they then have the ability to transfer wealth across generations. So, when you do take into account family structure, then you start to realize there's evidence that suggests that if young people, again, of any race, adopt certain behaviors, it dramatically increases the likelihood that they'll improve, enter the middle class or beyond. So in 2017, there was a report called the Millennial Success Sequence that showed that if you finished your high school degree, had full-time work of any kind, just so you learned the dignity and discipline of work, and then if you had children, you got married first. In the black community, 91% of people avoided poverty when they reached their young adult years, age 28 to 34. That's important data that young people need to know to say that actually there is something that you can do. I mean, Raj Chetty, an incredible economist who's done work around intergenerational mobility, studied 40 million children and their parents by mining tax records to understand what were the factors that really drive intergenerational wealth. And what he found was that one of the biggest hyperlocal factors that determine upward mobility or, in fact, downward mobility are the measures of father presence and marriage rates in a given location. Isn't this important information young kids need to know?
Well, right, and the remarkable thing is these truisms, which we have known for generations, are being not just ignored, being actively eliminated. I mean, I just go back to that East Harlem Scholars Academy superintendent. Don't elevate examples of black success. Don't elevate black Americans who've been successful in whatever endeavor, because it just feeds the notion that some people are insulated from racism. That is a remarkable position to take. And also, in addition to the what you talked about, the soft bigotry of low expectations, the learned helplessness, and Oprah, of all people, promoting that, there's also, so that's a white supremacist position. There's also the arrogance of Oprah. So this is the system, but you're better than me? You were able to do what you were able to do because you're better than me? I can't do what you did? That there's an arrogance to people preaching from positions of celebrity and status and wealth, saying, this is the system, I was able to make it because I'm special, but you're not and you can't.
I mean, Oprah Winfrey, again, is a shining example of the power of free enterprise, determination, agency, entrepreneurship. These are all incredible characteristics that we want to cultivate in all kids, and especially in black kids. I mean, it's not that racism doesn't exist. I think one of the issues here is that folks think that in order to have an anti-racist position, or the critics are that, well, these folks are saying racism doesn't exist. No, actually, we're saying that discrimination along racial lines, class lines, gender lines does still exist. The question is it so debilitating that you are just reduced to a helpless victim that has no power to take control over your life? Also,
how should it be addressed? Should it be addressed by as state bureaucrats picking and choosing how many people get to do this and how many people get to do that based on some non-behavioral characteristic? How do you want to address the inequities that do exist? What's the most moral and effective way to do it? That's the other conversation.
Exactly right. What are the strategies? And then let's have a real debate about that. In the paper, I cite 3 strategies. One is this concept of earned success, the notion that money generated through hard work is much more rewarding than money that's simply given to you. right? So how can schools become better equipped to encourage young people to go out and start their own businesses? The idea of wealth generation. How do you access venture capital? How do you stimulate entrepreneurship, particularly within low-income communities? If you study almost any group that had been persecuted, part of their strategy on their pathway to prosperity were high levels of launching their own businesses. So how many young people know about, for example, Harlem Capital Partners, a new firm in Harlem that is looking to invest in 1,000 minority and female founders over the next 20 years? Or a recent black entrepreneur that just created a $100 million fund to invest in female entrepreneurs. I mean, these are the ideas that are about agency, that go out and get it. These resources exist for you. You know, should we be teaching the success sequence in schools? You know, what I just said, not as a prescriptive that you must follow this pathway, but most kids need to know that there are decisions within your control that result in more than 90% of the time avoiding poverty. Shouldn't we teach that as one pathway along with others that young people can know about, and then they decide? And one thing that's interesting, there's a recent survey, nationwide survey just done about this topic of should we teach these kinds of things in schools. 72% of parents said they would very much support explicitly teaching the pathway of the success sequence in school. So it's very interesting when you actually speak of the people who others claim to be advocating for, when you bypass those gatekeepers and talk to the actual folks, their positions on these things are very, very different. They want their kids to achieve the American dream, and they want to understand how is it that millions and millions and millions of others have done the exact same thing that they aspire to do for their children.
He is Ian Rowe, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and CEO of Public Prep in New York City. Ian, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political announcement.
Here's the president of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, Todd Meisch, talking about the proposed income tax hike amendment on the November state ballot.
Springfield politicians already raised income taxes twice in the last decade. This tax hike amendment would let them increase taxes by billions more whenever they want, and a blank check to spend the money however they want, with no limits and no accountability. It would trigger a huge tax increase on thousands of small business owners and give Illinois the nation's second highest tax rate on large employers. The result would be more closed businesses, more lost jobs, and even more